Good evening. Testing sound for online. Good. Thank you, Vice Chair Thompson. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the June 25th, 2024 City of Portland Planning Commission meeting. I am the chair, Mary Rain O'Mara, and I'm joined in person today by Commissioner Spivak, Vice Chair Pouncil, Commissioner Alexander, and Commissioner Patel. Virtually, we have Vice Chair Thompson and Commissioner Routh, and absent this evening is Commissioner Lang. So we will start with a few items of business per usual, and then the main item for tonight's agenda is a continuation of the Montgomery Park Area Plan. We have a continued work session this evening. So with that, I will open it up to see if there are any items of interest from commissioners.
Yeah, this is Vice Chair Pouncil. I just wanted to share that this Saturday at Cathedral Park between 4 and 9 will be a celebration, a river ribbon cutting celebration for the new fishing and swimming dock that's under Cathedral Park. This was part of a community coalition of river-focused organizations and the Human Access Project. So just want to give a shout out to that and hopefully see a lot of familiar faces.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair Pouncil. Sounds like a fun event. And congratulations to everyone that worked on it to get it to opening. Any other items of interest from commissioners? Okay. Patricia, do we have a director's report this evening?
Hi, good afternoon, commissioners. Patricia Diefendorfer, Chief Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Hope you're all well and enjoying our warmer weather. Just a couple of small items. I think you received an email from Julie last Friday notifying the commission about the appointment that is the 9th commissioner is being appointed at council tomorrow. So you had some background on the person, but it's Brian Ames, and he is a construction manager with Walsh Construction and brings a lot of kind of construction and development knowledge and experience. So that will be the perspective that he'll bring to the commission. I think he'll be a nice addition to the commission. So just wanted to make sure that you saw that email and you're aware of that. Brian will be starting with the commission, the meeting that is July 15th, I believe, or sorry, July 15th is his official start date, but the first meeting he will be in attendance for is July 23rd. Thank you. Yeah. So that is one announcement. And then the other announcement was just that the land division code, which this commission heard and recommended approval to council on, is slated to go to council on July 17th. And Chair O'Mara will be presenting the Planning Commission's recommendation to council at that meeting. So thank you, Chair O'Mara. And I think that's all of the announcements that I have right now. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Okay, let's move on to our consent agenda, which I believe is just the one item of minutes for the June 11th Planning Commission meeting. So we'll go ahead and all in favor. I'm sorry, what? Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped the move in second. Thank you, Julie. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you, Commissioner Alexander. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Routh, thank you. Okay, any discussion? All right, ready to vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I think we've got unanimous already. Just checking online here. Okay, so consent agenda is approved. And now we will move on to our main item for this evening, which is a continuation of the work session for the Montgomery Park Area Plan. So we have Ryan Singer, Barry Manning, and maybe Joan? Joan is on my agenda. And I know we have our PBOT representative as well. So I'll let you all introduce yourselves as you get going. As we have you start your presentation and get the presentation up for us to view, any disclosures from commissioners specific to this item? Okay, I'm not seeing any.
Chair O'Meara, can we do a quick sound check with the folks, the virtual people online?
Oh,
so
yeah,
we
I
can
had
make sure
done that
we can
early
hear
on,
them?
and Vice Chair
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thompson said it was good.
Right, but
Yeah.
so that we
I
can
can
make
hear- I
sure
can
we
hear you
hear
great.
that
Oh,
we're
sure. Could we
hearing
have,
them.
Steph, could you speak, Commissioner Routh, just to test out our sound?
Hello, it is a fine day.
Thank you. It's very quiet, and we did have this issue last time.
Erica, will you give us a sound check too, please?
Yes, I can do so, and Steph sounds loud and clear to me.
Okay. You are all coming through a little quiet for us. Okay, we did just raise the volume, so hopefully that's fixed. And we will go ahead and ask our staff presenters to proceed with our work session. Thank you so much.
Do you want to set anything up, or should we just launch in? Okay, great. Thanks, Chair O'Meara. I'm Barry Manning with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and I'm joined by Ryan Singer, Sean Canny up here, who will introduce themselves as well. And as you've said, we're back here tonight to talk a little bit more about issues that we wanted to bring to you in terms of work session to provide the commission with a little bit more information about the plan in the area and some of the work behind the scenes that wasn't covered in the first couple of presentations, and in response to your questions about things you've heard in testimony and are interested in. So tonight we're going to, I have to share, sorry. Start off with this. Let's see if that works.
No, I need to go into Zoom.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see if this works. What are we seeing now? Yeah, no?
There we go.
Okay, great. So tonight, I'm going to the next slide. Tonight, we are bringing back some information on equity and investment as it relates to the Montgomery Park Area Plan. Ryan will talk a little bit about value capture and public benefits. Tom Armstrong's going to be joining us, and he's going to talk a little bit about economic opportunities analysis, which is a topic that came up in discussion. And Sean and folks from PBOT will be talking about transportation and streetcar funding, as well as the local improvement district process and timing. And then I'll share with you some proposed amendments that staff is intending to bring based on what we've heard from you so far, and testimony, and some others that have come up from an internal perspective. And then we can talk about next steps. So that's tonight. Just to put it in perspective, at the last meeting, we covered the topics at the top of the list: housing and affordable housing, industrial land, and to some degree employment opportunities analysis, benefits agreement, and the York Group testimony. And at the next work session on 7/9, we're hoping to review those amendments, any amendments that the Planning Commission may have for us, and have your final discussion and hopefully a vote on the plan. So that's where we're heading and what we're looking at tonight. So I'm going to lead this one off with a little bit of discussion, framework about equity and investment, and talk about that at a fairly high level. And as we go through this presentation, I think you'll hear more about those topics from other presenters. So this is not going to cover everything on that topic, but we're going to cover a few things at a very high level on this one. So just to start off, the Planning Commission heard testimony and raised questions about issues related to equity and equitable development and investment. Again, tonight's presentation part is to share information about how the Montgomery Park Area Plan responds to equitable development issues. And related to this, again, you'll hear from other staff regarding value capture in the EOA. Just as a reminder, I'm flashing up some points about why we're proposing to plan and invest here. Again, Northwest Portland is a high opportunity area with nearby community services and amenities. The plan creates opportunities for new affordable housing in proximity to the central city and industrial jobs in the Northwest area. It creates opportunity for affordable housing provided sooner or beyond the required amount required by code through inclusionary housing. And there is an opportunity to support continued employment growth in the area through the zoning scheme that we have proposed, which includes not only employment zoning, but also some bonuses for employment uses as well. And finally, the ability to create a cost-effective public transit and transportation improvements in the area, a relatively short extension of the Portland streetcar that would serve an area that has the potential for thousands of housing units and jobs. And Sean will talk a little bit more about that. So I mentioned that it's the Northwest Montgomery Park area plan area is a high opportunity area. And what I'm showing you here is a opportunity mapping map that shows areas within the city that have access to key indicators of success and opportunity. There's a variety of approaches we need to realize and improve equity overall. Investments in transportation and housing throughout the city can help us achieve that. And there's particular benefit for investments of affordable opportunity in these high opportunity areas. As you can see on this map, the MPAP area is just on the border of Northwest, which is number 5, which is the highest of the high opportunity areas, and itself lies within this area that's designated as a 4. And the methodology used to create this opportunity mapping includes 5 indicators that help create this composite opportunity score, and those indicators are level of childhood education. So that's an indicator of good schools in the area and proximity to them. Employment, which includes the number of higher wage industries within a mile and the number of lower wage industries within a mile and proximity to adult education resources. So the area, these high opportunity areas are proximate to jobs as well as educational resources for adults. Transportation, so proximity to transit and the density of sidewalks, so walkability and the ability to get around easily in an area is one of the indicators. Access to family wage jobs, so the indicator is the number of family wage jobs within 60-minute transit trip of the area. So this is also an area that has good access again to jobs. And then healthy eating and active living, which includes the notions about proximity to parks and food sources and healthcare. So combined, these factors add up to places that have many of the amenities and services that create success for households. And creating opportunity for affordable housing in this area and jobs provides more access to those kinds of amenities in this area. Combined with the notions of opportunity are the notions that the area that we're doing planning for is also relatively low, has a relatively low household displacement risk. Northwest is generally a higher income area in the city that has a lower percentage of people of color in the area. Northwest has about 20% people of color compared to about 29% citywide. It's typically a more educated population with about 65% of the population having a 4-year or greater degree. There are fewer children in the area, about 8% of the population under 18. It does have a high percentage of renters, 71% of the area, and that correlates to the fact that the housing in the area is largely moving one. So overall, the population in this area is less vulnerable to displacement pressures than other areas in the city where those factors might not be in place, where there are lower income folks, maybe a higher percentage of people of color that might be displaced. Pardon me? And we're getting feedback.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Commissioner Thompson. The audio quality just became really poor for me, and I don't know if that's just a me problem or, oh, I'm seeing others not.
No,
Okay.
it's
All
a
right.
we problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're looking into it now. Thank you, Vice Chair Thompson.
Right, now you need to reshare.
That works.
I just turned it off.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's much better. Sorry. So to finish up this slide, part of the other displacement risk, we did an analysis earlier on in the project when we were looking at larger study area and then zooming in on this area that considered, displacement risk in the Northwest area and what impact streetcar might have on that, because that is often thought of as a potential risk for displacement as that kind of an investment. And that analysis concluded that displacement risk because of introduction of streetcar was relatively low in this area because of the presence of the existing streetcar line. And that was already part of the background dynamic in this area, that rents had already achieved those levels and that introduction of streetcar wouldn't necessarily increase market pressures in this particular area. And then finally, and that's in the broader area, so that's related displacement pressure. Direct displacement in the plan area is relatively limited. As we said in the first work session, there's a handful of houses, 7 to 8 houses in that area, largely owner occupied. Those actually are non-conforming right now in an industrial zone. They would become conforming with the zoning that we're applying, which would allow housing and make those conforming uses. So we think the displacement risk, both inside the plan area and adjacent to the plan area, is relatively low. Want to talk a little bit about jobs?
Can we jump in with questions?
Sure.
Okay. Commissioner Alexander, go ahead.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I understand the focus on displacement, and I guess what I'm drawn to is looking at that same dynamic in other areas of the city where historically displaced populations have had the opportunity to now be brought back into a developing space. The low percentages here would argue that there's not a significant historically displaced population, BIPOC population here. And I'm just curious as to how you reconcile yourself to that. You're fixing something that hadn't been broken in the way that it had in other parts of the city. If you understand what I'm saying.
I think I understand what you're saying. I think if I understand you correctly, we don't have a population base here that is significantly subject to displacement or has been displaced here, and that.
Yes.
It's a different issue than it would be, for instance, in the lower Albina area or other parts, East Portland parts of the city, where there are those populations that have potential to be displaced. Am I understanding that correctly?
And whether there's an opportunity or an obligation to have these numbers look differently moving forward, because it is a very low relative percentage within a city that has a growing number of underserved, marginalized BIPOC communities.
Yeah.
Maybe I could, did you want to keep going? I was just
No,
gonna,
go ahead if you want to jump in.
I was going to
Yeah.
offer something. Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. I was just going to say, I think sharing this data is exactly the reason why we're saying it is important to try to create more opportunity for housing of all kinds and affordable housing in this area, because this area is a high opportunity area where allowing more households to have the opportunity to live here gives them access to a lot of the things that this area offers, right? So by making this change, for example, we create the opportunity to have more households, including more affordable units, that these numbers can start to reflect that greater diversity of income levels that could be accommodated in that new housing stock. So I think that's exactly what we're trying to demonstrate here, is that this is an area of high opportunity, and we need to create opportunities for more households, more different kinds of households, different income levels, to be able to enjoy the amenities that this area has.
And I appreciate that. And I think my desire is to have that explicit, as opposed to there's less harm being done here, as opposed to there's greater opportunity to move these markers forward. So I just, and it's not a criticism, it's just an observation.
And I think we have heard testimony from some of our community participants, including the York Group, who you heard from, that also have that same desire. So I think that's part of what we're hoping to achieve through the provision of more affordability in this area and providing those new units and increase opportunity for groups that wouldn't be here, that haven't been here recently otherwise. Yeah.
Commissioner Alexander, I might just add one other point, which is that in this area, sorry, kind of lost my train of thought. I apologize. I think, the question, thank you. The question was, I think the concern often is, are the actions that are being proposed going to contribute to displacement? So that's why we're showing what the demographic information is currently. We're saying that these actions are not expected to have an impact on the existing population and cause displacement among existing residents, because the existing residents are positioned in such a way they're unlikely to be impacted by involuntary displacement, because they're higher income individuals who can live in more parts of the city. And so this is meant to try to answer the question of, is there a concern about displacement impact here? And I think these numbers demonstrate that there is, in fact, not a concern about displacement impacts, because the people here have resources and are unlikely to be displaced in the way that in some areas where you would have similar actions. And if there's a higher percentage of people with lower incomes, they're less able to weather any changes in the market that might occur. I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, Patricia. Thank you. Wanted to talk a little bit about jobs and what the plan does for jobs, and what some of the existing conditions are for jobs in terms of concerns about displacement. As we've covered in previous presentations, the plan proposes to use employment zones in this area to evoke a mixed-use employment district. We're proposing to use the EX Central Employment Zone and the EG1 General Employment Zone in the area. The EX would allow for housing and the EG1 would not allow for housing. So that's the two zones that we plan to use in the area. Overall, as we look at the job intensity that we expect to have here, while we are converting some acreage that is currently designated as industrial sanctuary and general employment, the new zones will allow employment, and we expect to have 4,000 or more new job opportunities in this area, but in a wider array of uses, so not strictly industrial jobs. And I think Tom Armstrong, when he talks about the economic opportunities analysis, we'll talk a little bit more about how those jobs that we expect to have here in a wider array of types relate to middle wage jobs that we're all concerned about, and the jobs that are accessible to people potentially without a four-year degree. So, but we do expect to have more jobs overall in the area, and a component of those will be middle wage and middle income jobs, not only by virtue of the benefits agreement that's being shaped up, but by just virtue of the nature of the jobs that would occur in this area. So office jobs and other types of employment will have a middle wage component. I want to mention that we did a existing conditions report. Many of you have probably looked at that, and it looked at a larger Montgomery Park to Hollywood study area that looked at even a larger area in Northwest Portland than we're planning for right now. But we did some preliminary background work on the types of jobs that were in the area when we did that report in 2019. And what we found was about 44% of the jobs in this study, Northwest study area, were already trending towards office. So more office jobs in this area than in the manufacturing and production categories. At the time we did the report, it showed about 28% of the jobs were in production and distribution types of jobs. So, and the report also concluded that production and distribution were on the decline in this area. They declined from about 37% of all the jobs in the area to only about 28% of the jobs in the area between 2008 and 2018. So we were seeing a trend away from production and distribution and towards office jobs in the area overall. And again, Tom will talk a little bit about, how middle wage jobs are realized within those different categories and how that plays out here in this area. And I'm showing you the map, by the way, here, just to show you the area where most of the jobs that are in the study area are currently concentrated. In that yellow band, which is the employment buffer adjacent to Northwest Nikolai, there are some 300-ish jobs in more industrial type of uses. In the area to the right, and if I wish I had a pointer that I could point to this thing, but between 23rd and 24th Avenue, there's a fair number of jobs, potentially up to 300 or 400 jobs in those industrial buildings on the right-hand side adjacent to Highway 30. And then in the band along the bottom of that map, which is between Vaughan and Wilson Street, there were also a fair number of jobs. Many of those may be jobs that are related to the ESCO headquarters, which is still located in that area. But that's the band where most of the jobs are located. I also have the Montgomery Park building shown there, and that's also a source of many jobs in the area currently. This next slide really talks about investment and equity in other parts of the city, and we just wanted to touch on this. We heard some questions raised about throughout the process, and then I think from the commission as well about how we'll focus in Northwest is an appropriate move from an equitable development or an equity priority perspective. And this slide is intended to show other parts of the city that have planning efforts that are going on now or have been recently completed that are also underway. So we're not just doing work in Northwest Portland and investment in Northwest Portland, but we have things going on elsewhere. Highlighted in blue are projects that BPS has either recently completed or anticipates to get underway very soon. They include Inner East Side Planning Study, which is that large circle around the area between Southeast 12th and about East 60th Avenue, which will be looking at opportunities for increasing densities and opportunities for housing in close-in neighborhoods. It includes planning for the Albina and Lloyd districts, which are circled up here. It also includes the recently adopted, which you recently heard, Lower Southeast Rising Plan, which is circled down here, and the West Portland Town Center Plan, which is the circle down here. And finally, in the East Portland area, the Park Rose Argay Development Study, which looked at development opportunity on the Rossi Farms site. And that was a project that got completed in, I believe, 2019. So we've recently done some planning studies and we have some more on the way. We also have several TIF districts that are either existing or being considered in the area. And TIF is tax increment financing, which is a tool that Prosper Portland uses to make investments in communities and help support community growth and development. Those include the Cully TIF district, which is up here. Where's my pointer there? Right here at the top of the map near the industrial areas in the north, and Gateway, which is located just east of I-205, which I'm circling now, and also includes 3 TIF districts that are under exploration as part of the East Portland TIF analysis. That includes areas around 82nd Avenue, areas around Park Rose and Argay, which I'm circling here, which includes that Rossi Farm site, and then an area of East Portland that is a broader East Portland area that includes the light rail stations on 122nd and 148th and part of 162nd and some areas broadly north and south of there. So there's quite a few areas that are being explored for investment. PBOT, I've listed, I haven't indicated on the map, several projects that they're investing in, including 82nd Avenue, which is getting a large capital investment and then may have more to come as bus rapid transit is being considered in the area. PBOT's also done some recent planning and investment on 122nd Avenue, as well as quite a bit of East Portland sidewalk infill, and is embarking on a Lower Albina and Broadway equitable, what's the name of the grant again? Reconnecting Communities grant. So there's some work going on in other districts, and I just do this to point out that all of these districts are in areas where there's different demographics and different things going on in these centers. Many of these are in centers, and we're advancing equitable development issues across the city, and these are some examples of how those are playing out. I also wanted to show on my last slide here before I hand it over to Ryan how the comp plan looks at equity and investment. And this slide is a diagram that's in the comprehensive plan that talks about the different centers, which are arrayed in the dots on the map, their level of need, which higher need centers are shown above the line, lower need centers are shown below the line, and their level of growth expectation, lower growth centers being on the left and higher growth centers being on the right. And it kind of sorts out which centers fall into which categories. And I guess the thing to note here is, Northwest is a lower need neighborhood with a higher growth potential shown here in red. And the other places that we talked about in the last slide where we've got other ongoing planning projects are scattered throughout this diagram, but many of them are above the line in higher need areas, both in low growth and high growth areas. And so the takeaway that we wanted to leave you with here is that even though Northwest is shown on the lower need area, it is in a high growth area, and the policy direction there is to fill service gaps and accommodate growth. So investment in transportation and transit improvements in this area and the rezoning are really designed to accommodate that kind of direction in Northwest Portland. And other areas shown in yellow, both above and below the line, will have different needs, and we'll find those and discover those as we go through those planning process, or they're the outcomes of certain planning processes. As you've heard, in lower southeast rising, there were different kinds of needs, and those are being accommodated in different ways, including being part of the future TIF exploration along 82nd Avenue. So each of those different centers are going to get a different set of strategies to address equitable development and equity in their own different places. So any questions about that before I turn it over to Ryan to talk a little bit about value capture and public benefits? Great. We can come back to it if need be. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Barry. I want to briefly remind the Planning Commission of the public benefits that could be realized through the Montgomery Park Area Plan. They're listed here: the housing opportunity, job opportunity, the park and open space. We have some climate responsive elements, affordable commercial space, and then also cultural features. And so some of these we're able to get through regulation, and others we are using value capture to try to advance them. Go to the next slide. So there are some important points for a discussion on value capture. The first is that current economic conditions likely preclude value capture. But our analysis showing the opportunities for value capture are from prior economic cycles and assume future economic cycles will have similar opportunities. The analyses are also for different geographies and mix of uses. So we're going to show you some numbers, and they are for different proposals and scenarios. But the intention is to give the Planning Commission a sense of the scope of the value capture possible. Many of the regulatory tools in the zoning code are value capture mechanisms, so that includes inclusionary housing, open space requirements, or non-residential use requirements, among others. The public benefits agreement has additional value capture measures, the upfront affordable housing, middle wage jobs, and open space. Infrastructure is also supported by value capture, and that includes below grade utilities like water and sewer, and above ground streets, sidewalks, and of course the streetcar. So go to the next slide. So throughout the planning process, there were several analyses done for the scenarios that were being considered. The proposal was shaped by the analysis, community input, and also the proposed route of the streetcar, which underwent its own changes. The analysis that we're going to be seeing here was done earlier in the process, I think around 2020 or 2021, and it reflects a different market condition. Also want to remind the Commission that financial analysis is as much an art as it is a science. Choices are made about assumptions and the variables considered, and those are as important as the math. Next slide there. This is a table that has been in several presentations and shows the scenario analysis that was done to inform the planning process. A few things to note: that scenario 4, while it's the closest to the proposal in the Montgomery Park area plan, is for a different area. It's a larger area and a different mix of uses. It's skewed to a larger share of higher value housing. Just so that we're all on the same page about what some of these terms are, the residual land value is the estimated value of the land after development. The true value created by the land use changes and transportation investment is the residual value in scenario 4, for example, minus the baseline land value of the residual land value. So if there were no land use changes. So the idea is that you sort of subtract the number in the top of the column from the baseline scenario. And so for scenario 4, we have 103 million in sort of value that's available for capture. Let's go. Also, I reinforce that the estimates on this chart are for larger geography and different market conditions, as well as different mix of uses. Go ahead. This slide is another analysis with a more tightly focused on the Montgomery area plan and the sub areas that you're familiar with. Here we're showing that the additional residual land value, so essentially we did the math for the sub areas, subtracting them from the baseline there. So showing what's available for value capture. With one exception, in sub-area 3, we adjusted that for the actual sales value. So we knew what that land had recently sold for, and we just used that to estimate the value. This shows about 96 million in residual land value for capture. This is another snapshot in time, so keep that in mind, and it's just giving you a sense of the scope of what's possible through land value capture. So
I could use some clarity on this. So in this map, are you saying that these properties sold for the amounts of money shown below, or that's what they would be worth?
That's what they would be available. Yeah, it's like sort of what they would, post-development, what they would be able to, the value of them, what they could sell for.
If they're built out as zoning now allows.
Or zoning
Would allow if this project's
Yeah.
adopted.
Yeah.
So this is, just for the record, Patricia Diefendorfer, so this is modeling some financial information, right? To understand what is the capacity, it's a way to estimate the value that's being created by the combination really of the changes that are proposed, the land use changes that are proposed, and the streetcar, and trying to understand what amount of that extra value that's created in the land could be captured back for purposes of public benefit. It doesn't mean that it's an exact amount, like we should, if there's 96% residual land value that we should be capturing, sorry, $96 million worth of residual land value that we should be capturing $96 million worth of public benefits. Because I think the residual land value also includes the profit that
Yeah.
that the developer
Yeah.
would have to make the project even worthwhile. right?
Maybe for reference, what, like,
Yeah.
you said one of these just sold recently. What did it sell for? Or,
That was,
It didn't sell, we're not talking, that
wasn't,
number.
yeah, so this
Sub-area
wasn't
3
recent.
is not
okay, I mean,
recent.
the
Yeah,
implication
yeah.
is that they would sell for a lot less
Do you have
today,
that
right?
answer, Barry?
They would sell for less today. Yes, but we're just giving it a snapshot in time when we did this analysis into 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
So this is why we
Right, 'cause-
want to make sure that it's kind of clear that this is just showing you what the analysis showed in that snapshot in time. We haven't updated
In
that
2020, okay.
particular analysis.
Okay, that's helpful, because, I mean, this is a really hard project to do, because today, the residual land value with this upzoning would be nothing compared, I mean,
That's
almost
what,
nothing, right?
yeah, I mean,
where we
one
are
of
in the
my first
cycle.
point is the current economic
yeah,
cycle,
yeah.
there's no value capture there's no value to capture right now.
So the real comparison is, in a stronger economic cycle, how does building
Yes.
five-plus-story buildings compare with active industrial commercial use?
Correct.
That's right.
That's the comparison. Is that the comparison that?
That's the
they did?
comparison, and we're using basically pre-pandemic sort of analyses to sort of model what a future economic cycle
that
will
helps.
look like.
And just to be clear, to respond to your question, that in one of the sub areas, all of the sub areas were modeled based on tax assessed value. That was the way the consultant that we engaged with had done the modeling. As we started to drill down, they had tracked down that at least one of the sites had a pretty major sale that really influenced what the residual land value would be. So they adjusted that value based on the actual sales price of that land rather than the tax assessed value, which was much different. So that's what Ryan
Yeah.
was referring to.
And also, one thing to note here is if you look at sub-area 1, which is an area with smaller lots, it's also pretty active in terms of businesses and other sort of things going on there. There's not a lot of additional residual land value, and we would say that that's by design, that this is not an area where we necessarily want to supercharge housing production. Because for the reasons I just stated, that it's sort of a busy place where we'd want to retain some businesses there.
Okay.
So what,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Commissioner Thompson. Can you back up to that last slide and please just clarify if the color coding that we're seeing here corresponds to the sub-districts? And if so, can you provide a refresher on what sub-districts are which? Because I can't find it anywhere in the planning documents, and I think.
okay. Yeah, this is an image we used in our prior presentations.
So that is correct. I think we used letters
Oh.
to describe sub-districts previously, and so it's hard to correlate. Commissioner Thompson, I understand your question. I think it's hard to correlate this map to the districts that we showed by letters in the other maps, but they do correspond. So I think if we went from left to right, I think 4 would be sub-district A. Tell me if I've got this right or wrong. I think 4 would be,
That was
or sorry, 4 would be sub-district B.
Yeah.
3 would be sub-district D.
5 is
Okay,
A.
sorry, 5 is A, 4 is B,
4 is C as well. B and C are
4
both
is
in.
B and C are
C.
combined, yes.
3 is D,
Yes.
2 is
F.
F,
Yep.
and
And
1
1
is
is
E.
E.
That's
Yes.
right.
So-
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
The sub-districts in, I'm sorry, the sub-districts in the plan district are different than the sub-districts here, which correspond to the urban design framework that's in the document and the urban design work that's going on. And we're, part of our amendments is to reconcile some of that. The Design Commission asked us to work on that
Yeah.
as well, so.
So we will be fixing that confusion. Sorry about that.
Hey, thank you. No, you're
Yeah,
good.
no,
You passed the quiz.
I'm glad you asked, though,
That's very
because
helpful.
it is.
Thank you.
Okay, we can go.
Okay.
All right. Did we miss a slide? All right. So what does the plan try to capture, and what is the value of the plan? So those are sort of two separate questions. So I'll try to give you a sense of this, and I'll start with the infrastructure because it seems like the easiest, but none of these are particularly easy to sort of get at. But we know how much asphalt costs, or at least Sean probably does. The estimated value of the entire infrastructure package for the streetcar, rebuilding Northwest 23rd Avenue, building new streets on Northwest Roosevelt and Northwest Wilson Street, along with the below-grade utilities, that whole package is $120 million or so. The property owner contribution, which includes street dedication, portions of the cost of the construction, engineering, and environmental work, among other things, is estimated at about $30 million. The value to the public, so when the public goes out and rides the streetcar and walks the sidewalks and drinks the water that's being delivered to these homes, is $120 million. So that's the value to the public. I'm going to go ahead. The housing is another piece of the value capture puzzle. One way to measure the value of affordable housing, and there's probably more than one way, but one way is to calculate the difference between the rent for an income restricted unit and a market rate unit. In this exercise, I use the average rent for a family of 3 in a 2-bedroom apartment at 60% area median income, and I use the Portland Housing Bureau's chart for their rents for this segment, and compared it to a market rate 2-bedroom unit in the Northwest District, and then multiply that by 200 units, and get about 1.9 million annually of sort of rent value that is being sort of contributed to the housing value capture. This is pretty conservative. If we just add that up, we're going to stick to that. But I did a little exercise. If you apply standard cost benefit, analysis, and multiply that by 20 years, discounting the sort of future value of that, it results in 21 million in value. But for our calculations, we're going to stick with the 1.9 million in annual value. The public benefit, the public experience is larger, with development costs in Portland around $423,000 per unit, and there's 200 units. And I'll have a chart later which will do some of that math for you. But we've got a little tally running at the top there, 31.9 million in value capture. Yeah.
So I like your discounting. So that's a little over $100,000 a unit of subsidy, effectively. Does anyone, maybe this is a question for Chair Mera, is the expectation that the developer will come up with this $100,000 per unit, or that they'll get it from the state in the form of tax credits, or the state in terms of lift funds? Or I'm trying to figure out, if I were a developer on this site, I'd be trying not to use my own money for this, so I'd be trying to go somewhere other than the city because the city is off limits. What's the expectation?
So the public benefit agreement says that they will build these 200 units without any public subsidy.
It says City of Portland, I think. Am I
City
correct on
of
that?
Portland subsidy.
I guess I'm
Yeah.
noting that there's other public subsidy out. If a developer would,
Yes.
some developers do
if they
9%
that-
projects without any Portland money. I mean,
Right.
what do you think, Mary Rain, do you think they would?
Yes, they could access state resources, probably not 9%, because that would be at the 0 to 30% for the majority of the building. I'm understanding this per unit cost to be an average. And did you look specifically at affordable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
60% AMI,
Yeah,
right?
60%
Okay,
area
60%
Yeah.
median
AMI,
income,
which
yeah.
is
And
what
of
the
course, there's some
requirement-
fluctuation there when you
Yeah.
look at, larger family size units or other variables.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, theoretically, even if you're not utilizing local PHB dollars, you could go after state or other fund sources.
And while the public benefits agreement does say it's up front, sort of the first housing, they could, as part of a development deal, do a larger building or, 300 units that sort of track with this to help with, cross subsidy and whatnot too.
And is this the whole area, this is in the central city, this is in the area where you get 100% limited tax abatement?
You do.
Is that right?
You do.
You-
Okay, so they get that for the first 2,000 units,
They,
assuming they qualified?
they get that,
Or for all of them,
For-
if they all have inclusionary housing?
yeah,
Yeah.
for any building that complies with inclusionary housing, and this would meet their inclusionary housing requirement, they get the benefit of having the tax abatement for the 10-year period like any other development would. But that's the only sort of local, if you will, public subsidy that they would be permitted to receive and still be in compliance with the public benefit agreement.
Okay. And going through this, I know we're not delving into the details on public subsidy, but whoever is, it looks like there's a little loophole because it says it won't, no City of Portland subsidy except for the SEC waivers on the affordable units and the tax abatement. The other tempting places the city might put money in would be infrastructure. And there is a comment about waiving SECs for parks beyond the cost of the park itself. That seems like a little wedge that, well, I guess would City of Portland be paying for roads, off-site costs, or waiving SECs on the market rate units for those? That would be a form of public subsidy for outside of the traditional affordable housing channels. Just, I mean, does that make sense as a question? It seems like there's an opportunity for Portland to subsidize this stuff that's not excluded currently.
So
Yeah.
the streets, and I think we'll get into that a little bit more, but the streets are largely the responsibility of the private developer, where the one difference or the one exception to that is the streets that are shared, where the streetcar will be running. There's an opportunity there to sort of share the cost of building the street in order to also accommodate and pay for the streetcar. And we, as a city, we can leverage the federal funding, so we can count all of the private development investment in that infrastructure as part of our match to the local government. So it can actually help us leverage more federal transportation money for the project. So I mean, I think there's degrees of subsidy there, but I think what we're trying to show is that largely these are expenses that would be borne by the private developer. And we're just trying to kind of, in a conservative way, tally up so that we can give you some sense of what this package, the value of this package is.
Yeah, and I think unless there was an exclusively affordable housing property out of these first 200, that it would not be competitive for state funding. So that's very,
I'm assuming there would be exclusively affordable housing would be the first thing out of their
I was thinking this would be a blended market and affordable. But I think that's still up for
The option-
determination.
Yeah.
Because if someone could lure like a 202 project or something that's affordable with federal funds, then they've just met the inclusionary housing requirement for the whole district. So I would
Right.
assume that's the
Yeah.
approach a
If
developer
it
would
is,
take.
if it is 100% affordable housing, then it would be competitive for state funding.
Right.
Yeah.
The thinking is the benefit is getting those units up front and getting them earlier in the development process and getting them first before other market rate projects.
Yeah, I should say my comments are not a criticism of the
Yeah.
proposal. It's just a reality
Sure.
check that I think that would
Sure.
probably would have, since you can't build any market rate stuff now anyway right now, the instinctive thing to do is to try and build your affordable units with some other form of public subsidy, get them built, and then suddenly you've got a free ride for the rest of the project. That's my guess of how it would go, which is not a bad thing to get more affordable housing and jump starting housing in the city is the engine is affordable housing right now. So I'm not opposed to that.
Okay. The middle wage jobs piece is another piece of value capture that we have a conservative value of $4 million based on the payment of the $5,000 a job in the public benefits agreement. That's if they do not meet the full requirement of 800 middle wage jobs. So, we're just using the values in the public benefits agreement to estimate the value capture here. I also want to note that the research suggests that middle wage jobs of this type, or the types that we are sort of contemplating here, and would be incentivized in Montgomery Park, have a high multiplier effect. Sometimes in the double digits for certain types of jobs. But, applying a conservative multiplier of 3 to the 800 middle wage jobs would result in 1,600 additional jobs that would sort of be associated with them. So this is, a high value proposition for the public. And then just our ticker up there, 35.9 million in estimated value capture. Go ahead. So for the park and open space, looking at this, we have the estimated value of the land, which in this number includes the foregone revenue from a future development, the location of the park itself, and what I'm calling the catalytic value, which is if there's no land for a park, there's no park. And so we have estimates of $4 million for that. The cost to develop the park is around $10 million, which would be offset by system development reductions, development charge reductions. So we're not including that in here, but if you look at the park, it's at least a $14 million park. The property owners have also committed to maintaining the park beyond the Park Bureau's standards, and that value is also very hard for us to measure, in addition to the value on health and environmental benefits and other things that can be reaped from open space like this. So I have this summary slide which attempts to put this all together and give the Planning Commission a sense of the value capture in the context of the full benefits of the project, or as full as I can get them on one slide. So the value capture, the contribution from the property owner, sums up to 39.9 million in our calculations, which leverages 1.3 miles of streetcar line and the associated infrastructure, 2,000 housing units, 200 of them income restricted, 800 middle wage jobs, 40,000 square feet of public open space, which is a complete neighborhood, we hope. An estimated public benefit of 264 million if we just start adding things together, and this includes the value of the infrastructure, which we've discussed, 84.6 million in affordable housing. This is the 200 units at $423,000 a unit. Middle wage jobs benefit of 45.6 million. That's 800 people with a salary of $57,000 annually working and spending money in the local economy. And then more than $14 million in benefit from the park, which is, again, doesn't include those health and environmental benefits. I also included some sense of what the value is for the people, 3,000 new streetcar riders, 4,420 people housed based on Portland's average household size, 442 are in income restricted units, 2,400 people employed based on a modest multiplier effect of 3, and 800 of those are middle wage jobs. Over 6,000 people living within a quarter mile of a new park. Our environmental benefits align with our goals and really are about greenhouse gas emissions from auto use, which studies show that a 43% greenhouse gas emission reduction from auto use within a quarter mile of transit, and about 1,000 pounds of carbon absorbed annually by the trees in the park. So that's what I have on value capture. and I am handing it over to Tom,
Unless there's any questions.
unless there's any questions. Yeah.
All right, I've got one more. And maybe this is a good one for Tom. If this consolidated building is an interesting concept, which if this developer using the inclusionary housing transfer provision, and let's just say there's a 200-unit affordable building and then 800 units elsewhere, then the market rate units would not get the tax abatement, I don't think. The market rate buildings. In the consolidated building scenario, with not the 200 will get the affordable housing, the tax abatement forever because they waive it in Portland. But how about the other 800 units? Would they get that tax abatement forever? Or 10 years, or not at all? I'm wondering what the county's on the hook for in this, because typically, if you transfer your units, inclusionary housing, this building all market, because some other building took care of the affordable, doesn't get the tax abatement. But in this scenario, it sounds like maybe they do get it, and if so, how long?
I can try to answer that. We might have to come back to you with a little more specifics, but I think that you are correct in that the 200-unit building that's affordable would definitely get the tax benefit or the tax exemption. If the other units don't have inclusionary, we did not account for them having access to the tax abatement program just because they, kind of did their
I would guess
inclusionary
the
units
developer
first.
might be expecting that, or
Yeah,
find
well-
out what's the expectation on it.
So that's something we have to work out through the public benefit agreement, but that was not a conclusion we all have already come to. So that's not the working assumption right now, I will say that. And I will also say, I think that's where the other option of another way to comply is the 15%. The higher requirement for affordable units, as if you do it building by building, in some ways, that might be more attractive with the tax abatement program, because that definitely would allow those buildings to take advantage of the tax abatement
Right,
program.
the distinction I'm trying to get, and I'm not expecting an
Yeah.
answer now, is that if you do the 15% at a time, then you get the tax abatement for 10 years, and then the county starts giving you money after that. If it's treated as one big building, then you get it forever, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
So that's
something
a
we
question
need
for
to-
another time.
Yeah,
but
that's
what I
something
was
we
trying
need to
get
clarify, but
I'm
that's
trying
a
to- I
really
want the county to
good-
eventually get some property tax revenue off this stuff. It doesn't have to be immediate, obviously, but at some point.
But just to maybe just take that just a thread further, and then we'll definitely come back to it. We'll do some more research. But if that building, the 200-unit building that's affordable, has a tax abatement in perpetuity,
I take it back. Maybe the most would be is 10 years for everything.
yeah,
Maybe that's the question of whether the market rate stuff gets
well,
10 years or not at all.
but that's what I was going to get at, is
Yeah.
I don't think that the arrangement, again, was not that they would have access to a tax abatement program if it wasn't already covered as part of the inclusionary housing project. So just because they're doing the affordable units up front doesn't guarantee all the market rate units that are associated with those affordable units to be able to take advantage of the tax abatement. I mean, that was definitely not what we were.
Okay, so the expectation is
Discussing.
it's sort of handled like the IH transfer program is, not as a consolidated, not as a single building, which that's what it's read to a little bit. If it's consolidated as one big building, then it would be treated differently than if you're transferring from the affordable to the market rate
It's
ones.
considered consolidated building for zoning purposes, but I believe for the purposes of the tax abatement, it would be considered the future building that's market rate, that's using.
It's a transfer.
Is transferring their obligation, right? They're
That makes
just
sense.
pre-doing it. They're doing it ahead of time.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
This is Commissioner Pouncil. Before we go further, I just had some clarifying, I guess. Back to the displacement we had talked about earlier about displacement. I was just curious about how it sounds like that this is going to create a large amount of value, property value in the area, and how is this going to impact like people who homeowners, fixed income people, like how does their taxes on their homes has there been any type of discussion or, about like, making sure that, people who possibly are on a fixed income that live in these houses, understanding that it is a high income, generating area. It sounds like, there's a wonderful, development that's happening, but I'm just kind of wondering, how are the people who have been living in the neighborhoods, how do they, make sure that they're not,
So the residual
impacted.
value is based on is like post-development. So, and my understanding of way tax assessment works is that they assess for the actual property improvements that are there now. So for taxes to go up, they would have to redevelop. So for a homeowner who owns their house, they would be continued to be assessed for the value of the house that's there, not on a future, if they could build an apartment building there. So it shouldn't have that direct effect on assessed value.
Okay. And is that the case too with the streetcar as well? So the streetcar that goes through someone's, will their property values go up? Will their taxes for their homes be
Can I-
increased as well?
John's going to speak to that. and-
There, clarify one point though, and maybe Tom could assist with this. I mean, so a single family homeowner in the area that's not in the area of change and isn't necessarily going to redevelop their lot, nothing will change for them because taxes are based on assessed value, and assessed value typically is, I mean, I guess it's updated very incrementally year by year, right? So it's not like, even if there was a lot of value accruing to various properties just by being in this area, individual property owners, if they don't sell their house, will not see higher tax bills other than whatever is there like a standard
State law
percentage?
regulates
Yeah,
that,
so
3%.
that's capped and governed by state law.
Okay.
So people are not going to be, suddenly having to pay taxes that are way higher and perhaps above their means if they're on fixed incomes, for example. I think what Sean will talk about when we go into some of the transportation issues is the local improvement district, right? There is, through the local improvement district, there will be an assessment to individual properties, and he's going to describe that process a little bit more. And there could be some amount of payment that those property owners would have to pay, but it's typically scaled to the size of the property and different conditions that Sean will describe. So those also are not expected to be significant to changes to property, to taxes, for example. Okay.
Thanks for that.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Armstrong, Supervising Planner with BPS. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Economic Opportunities Analysis, the EOA, and the potential impact from the proposed zoning changes. So just as to reground everyone from a year plus ago when we did the orientations. So the EOA is an analysis that's required under statewide planning goal 9, that all cities have to look out 20 years and forecast employment demand and show that they have a 20-year supply to meet expected future growth. And we last did this in 2016 as part of the comprehensive plan update. And we adopted a new EOA as part of that process. We're now in the early stages of updating the EOA to extend sort of that growth period out to 2045 and to incorporate the changes in market trends. That work is not done yet. And I will sort of caution that sort of looking too far forward and sort of, we can't really rely on even that preliminary data to make this decision. And so a lot of what you'll see here today sort of grounds that impact in what is in the 2016 EOA, because it is adopted. And the new one, the update, hasn't gone through the full review process. So it's unreliable information, if you will. Next slide, please. So again, the EOA, we base it on a number of different what we call geographies, and think of these as parts of Portland that share similar characteristics. So in the middle, you have the sort of purple areas are the central city, the downtown, the Pearl, Lloyd District, versus, say, the areas in yellow, the Central East Side and the Lower Albina area. Those are slightly different characteristics, and so that's how we account for that. In the main industrial areas along the Portland Harbor, and then along across the Columbia River out to the airport, and then the Columbia East area, we have really three main industrial geographies. What you see in brown, the direct river frontage, we call harbor access lands. That's where the river-related, river-dependent industrial uses are. Then adjacent to that, and then running out towards the airport in the darker gray, is what we call the harbor and airport districts. And then sort of east of 82nd Avenue, that area we call Columbia East. It developed a little bit later, and a little bit more of that sort of suburban business park character. So there's overlapping uses, but they each have a slightly different character. Next slide, please. And so in the 2016, where we wound up in the 2016 EOA is, and this is sort of that reconciliation table, is that we in total, we expected about 1,685 acres of demand in the industrial area. There's a fourth area, a smaller fourth area called dispersed employment. We have pockets of industrial scattered throughout the city, things like the Brooklyn Yards, the small industrial buildings along I-84, that sort of thing. That's the dispersed employment areas. But anyway, the total was, we identified almost 1,700 acres of demand for future employment growth. We identified 1,800 acres of land supply, which left us with about 111 acres of surplus industrial capacity. Subsequently to this, we have done some changes. We, did the manufactured dwelling park rezoning that took out about 25 acres of that capacity, and a few zone changes along the south end of 82nd Avenue, again, that sort of reduced that a little bit. So, but we still have, at the high level, a surplus capacity of industrial land. Next slide, please. So in terms of this plan and the changes that we're looking at, this is the current comprehensive plan designations. And I will note that as part of the 2016 comprehensive plan, we did change the ESCO site there in the middle. The comprehensive plan designation changed to a mixed employment. We left the heavy industrial zoning in place, but that began to signal and recognize a transition, part of which is recognized in the Giles Lake Plan District area of that subdistrict. Next slide, please. So the changes, really the significant changes that impact sort of the industrial land capacity are the areas in purple with the crosshatch that are going to EX. the central employment, which is really the mixed-use zone because it introduces the opportunity for housing. The little bit of change up there in the northwest corner that goes from industrial sanctuary to mixed employment. With the mixed employment zoning, the EG zoning, you can still do a full range, a wide range of industrial uses, of manufacturing and distribution uses. It limits some of the waste-related uses, but that still is essentially, and we count it as that sort of industrial employment zoning. So the impact analysis really focuses on what's changing to that EX zone. Next slide, please. And so what we're looking at is really 34 acres that's going from that industrial employment designation to the mixed-use EX designation. And to put that 34 acres in context, we have, over 13,000 acres of an industrial and employment land across the city. So a slight decline in our industrial land base, but relatively small in the scheme of things. If we zoom in to what's going on in the harbor and airport districts, in 2016 we identified over 1,000 acres of buildable land, and so taking again sort of 34 acres out of that equation, it's about 33% of what's available, or what we identified as being available in the harbor and airport districts. And then finally, another consideration in the EOA and looking out is around larger industrial sites. That seems to be the most in demand and most constrained in terms of the city. And when you look at, especially this, if you look at the ESCO site in particular, coming in at about 18 acres, it fits into this 10 to 20 acre range. That 18 acres would represent about 10% of the large industrial sites that fit into that 10 to 20 acre category. Next slide. I think that actually this is, again, sort of when we zoom in on the larger industrial sites and look at the range of what we have out there. Again, we're talking about one 18-acre site out of 1,200 acres of large sites in the city. So again, relatively a minor player in the larger scheme of things when we look at our whole industrial land base. Next slide, please. The other question that we heard last time was just to get some more context and what is going on in our industrial areas and what are some of the development trends. And so this is a slide we've shown before as part of your orientation, but just a reminder that, Portland enjoys a relatively balanced economy in terms of where the different jobs are. And the sectors, the dark gray up in the upper right is our industrial sectors. It's about 22% of the jobs in Portland. To the left there, retail, consumer services make up about 24%. Healthcare and education make up about 24%, and the office sectors make up about 30%. So again, relatively balanced economy. Next slide, please. And in terms of job employment trends, we've seen all of those grow over time. And this is for the Tri-County area, but the job growth in Portland has been, shown similar trends. I think what you see here in the red line there, that steep decline, is the pandemic and the hit that it took really to our retail and especially to our leisure and hospitality service jobs. And those have been the slowest to recover. And especially in Portland, we're really showing lagging recovery in those sectors, whereas the other sectors have been increasing. And sort of we're a little bit amazed that unlike past recessions, which you see sort of to the left there, with the gray line, you see that sharp decline in industrial jobs as part of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. We really didn't see that with the pandemic recession. Like they were able to maintain those jobs through the recession. And so we haven't seen the erosion of that base that we have to recover and then grow from. And then if you go to the next slide, it really shows in terms of the industrial building space, new building space coming online in Portland, that, the sort of, if you look at that, the first bar being the 2010 to 13 period, so we're coming out of the Great Recession and we're early recovery. After 2013, things really began to take off. And then that last gray bar is sort of that pandemic recession. And we see that new space, continued strong demand, and even begin to see the manufacturing space begin to have an uptick coming out of the pandemic recession. So there's been really strong demand in Portland for industrial development. Next slide, please. There was another question about employment densities and how those compare for different types of job sectors, and especially sort of the top three lines is really a drill down into that industrial sector, and how does warehouse job densities compare to, say, manufacturing or other industrial service, think repair, or equipment rentals, that construction businesses. And what we see is what we've seen over time is that the warehouse and distribution jobs per acre has been increasing, especially as we get more e-commerce type jobs, and that the manufacturing job density has been decreasing with automation. And so they're starting to come together, and that sort of nets out at about 12 units or 12 jobs per acre, which is, compares to, if you think some of our hospitals and colleges, especially the colleges that have that more campus spread out, lower job density, high utilization by students and patients, but can be, and hospitals are quite dense in and of themselves. And then, retail sales and service are even higher. And then finally, office jobs that, really get you that dense employment. Next slide. A couple of slides here on access to opportunity and what we call middle wage jobs, and the ability to have upward wage career ladder over time. And what you see in this graph is a number of different middle and lower wage sectors, and how on the left side, think of that as the starting wage, and you can see a lot of those start at around the same point, but that over time, as you gain skills and you can really increase, especially with the industrial jobs, more so than, say, the retail jobs, the cashiers, the food prep, that sort of thing. That's why you see those lower lines being more flat in terms of their wages. I think what is sort of hidden in this slide is that yellow production manufacturing is also sitting on top of the office support admin jobs that have a similar wage trend, wage distribution. Next slide, please. So if we sort of take that information, the job density and the middle wage job shares, and really focus on, again, sort of what are the middle wage impacts to middle wage job opportunities, especially in converting the 34 acres of employment land, is, again, if it was just left with the industrial zoning, we probably average out somewhere close to 400 jobs About 70% of those are going to be middle wage jobs. The other might be office support or executive positions. So about 300 middle wage jobs. In a typical sort of office sector scenario, and this is sort of the mixed use development where, what we see, especially in our central city mixed use areas, intermixed use areas, we see up to 30% of that space going to more of the commercial office sector. And so, we could expect up to 2,800 jobs to build out. And then, again, the share of those office sector jobs that are middle wage jobs is only about 18%, but at that higher job density, it could get you 500 middle wage jobs. The development agreement for this area gets you, sort of hopefully locks in 800 jobs. So we're seeing a bump in that sort of middle wage job opportunity through that development agreement. Next slide, please. And so there were some questions about the EOA update and how this the proposed change to the 34 acres here, how that might affect decisions elsewhere in the city. There is a competition, if you will, for land in the industrial areas. Sometimes we call it a confluence. We have our rivers and the slough, and a lot of people want to be at this same area. I will say that, our approach to the update is a bit different than what we did in 2016, where in 2016, I think it's fair to say we were giving greater weight to the employment forecast and sort of providing, really working as hard as we could to meet the employment demand. I think this time around, we're taking a different approach, a more of a multiple policy objective approach, that how do we balance the economic development opportunities with the natural resource protection needs or the livability impacts or the sustainability impacts. I think we're recognizing that the industrial land supply is tight and it's getting tighter. I think that is, in turn, it's having us look at additional strategies to, part of, and again, we're doing the analysis right now, part of the tightness of the industrial land supply is because our industrial land supply is constrained. We have a lot of brownfields. We have a lot of unimproved streets or stormwater or water supply constraints, infrastructure constraints. And so we're trying to assess and evaluate what kind of investment could we do? How much of that constrained capacity could we unlock through a brownfield cleanup program that sort of increases that available capacity? We're also trying to again, align with the Advanced Portland strategies and those focus sectors and really look at, what are our economic strengths, right? We have a lot of vacant office space in the central city. How can we grow more central city businesses and office jobs that again, come with some of that middle wage opportunity. And then again, how can we support that through workforce and business development to sort of grow that middle wage opportunity in other sectors that aren't as dependent on that industrial land base. And then just another comment, we talked a little bit about this last time, but the process, we're still sort of in the early preliminary stages of the process. We're working on putting together a discussion draft. We're sharing pieces of that with what we call the collaborative working group of stakeholders to sort of check our work as we go along. But we still need to publish that discussion draft and have a wider community engagement and discussion about the different policy choices before we can sort of bring a proposed draft to you to really drill down on those policy choices. And so there's still some uncertainty, both in terms of process and where we wind up. And then beyond that, getting through council and adoption, we're still, subject to an appeal to LUBA and a drawn out appeal process from any sort of aggrieved party that we did too much natural resource protection or not enough or didn't address this issue right. So there's still that risk out there of an even longer process to go through. And that's what I had for you tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Tom. I wanted to confirm on the current uses of the currently zoned industrial land, that those would continue, correct? So anyone, and I
Yeah.
saw that, I think, in your
in the-
presentation, right? So that we're not talking about the zoning changes and there's currently, a small industrial manufacturer that is then displaced or has to stop
Right.
production, for
I think
example.
that's sort of one of the advantages of the EX zone is it does allow for that wide range of uses. So I'm pretty sure I wouldn't expect that we would immediately make someone non-conforming that could hamper their businesses. When you are non-conforming, it can be a barrier to financing or a barrier to selling the business. But that EX zone still allows for that wide range of industrial uses. So the existing businesses will be able to sort of continue on.
Great, thank you. And I see Vice Chair Thompson, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if someone could define what it means for a new job to be created in sub-district B, C, or D. Like, what does that actually mean? Because as we've been talking about this and the different types of jobs and the capacity for jobs tied to acreage or place, that's not necessarily the only paradigm that we're working in anymore. There are many remote jobs, and so I'm just curious how we are or are not controlling for that within the benefits agreement, to the extent that you could have a company that was like headquartered or something and had an address in one of the sub districts and then has 800 remote employees.
So I think, well, just one of the things, I don't think we're seeing a lot of businesses that are fully remote. I think Portland is somewhere, I would say the office jobs, I think the last thing I saw was like 30% in-person, 30% hybrid, and 30% remote. And especially for the in-person or even the hybrid, right? The hybrid job still, the person needs a desk and space. And so I think, that job is still sort of located there. That's where you earn your money. You pay your Oregon state taxes because you're employed by the Oregon business. I don't know, maybe Patricia on if you've explored the remote issue.
So the public benefit agreement, and these are good questions to raise because they'll help us think through the details of the public benefit agreement. As you know, what we have right now is the terms, so just high level terms. But the objective is there's a non-residential floor area requirement in the zoning for most of these properties. And the commitment is to achieve 800 new middle wage jobs on site, or and there's a process for Prosper Portland has a role in sort of ensuring or monitoring and checking on compliance with the public benefit agreement. And so there's a process that's outlined. The property owners or the property owners will have to show evidence of the jobs that have been created, and there will be a documentation process. And it's I think intervals like 3 or 5, 7, and 10 years into the public benefit agreement is when this reporting will happen. And if the jobs are not progressing at a rate that shows that by the end of the term of the public benefit agreement, there would be 800 new jobs, then there would be a requirement to start paying into a fund to help pay for workforce training and job development. So to answer your question, Commissioner Thompson, or Vice Chair Thompson, apologies, I would say that the intention is to have the jobs be on-site jobs. Typically, manufacturing or industrial jobs are on-site. And these are things that we can sort of think of and account for in the terms of the public benefit agreement and make sure that the outcomes that we're getting are those that we are hoping to achieve, which is actual on-site jobs or payment in lieu to this fund to support job training and workforce development elsewhere in middle wage, in sectors that generate middle wage jobs.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that that is the intent. I think it's probably worth continuing to develop that or make that more explicit in the agreement, because all of these things ultimately rely on each other, trying to create vibrant urban design and an equitable place to live with access to jobs. I just wanted to understand that a little bit more. And it did sound like from the earlier presentation too, that a substantial portion, if not majority, would actually be in non-industrial jobs with this future vision. And so figuring out how we account for that, unless I misunderstood the slide that you had, Barry, it looked like it was, 20 to 30% or something, and the rest were in service sectors and office.
And I'd like to clarify that point just very quickly, if I might, because that was just what the job picture was between 2008 and 2019. So that's just existing jobs and looking over that period of time and seeing what sectors those jobs were in. The public benefit agreement, the objective is to have 800 middle wage jobs, and it actually specifies certain sectors that are the traded sectors that are aligned with the Advanced Portland economic development strategy. Not exclusively, but that sort of alludes to the types of jobs that are contemplated, and those would be more what we would consider to be kind of the industrial middle wage jobs, although it wouldn't be necessarily exclusively that. But I just wanted to point out that is the focus.
I think Patricia's right. So the slides we showed earlier on, Commissioner Thompson or Vice Chair Thompson, were related to the existing conditions report that came out in 28, just showing what the trends were. I think the slide Ryan showed, which was modeling from our consultant Eco Northwest, showed kind of an array of what the expectation of jobs was, which included a component of industrial jobs and a component of office and a component of retail and other types of services as well. We can go back to those slides if we want to revisit them.
I see Commissioner Routh, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for all of this information. This is great. Question, Tom, you had mentioned about the economic opportunity analysis potentially going into appeal to Land Use Board of Appeals. Is MPAP also potentially subject? Like, could someone appeal that to LUBO?
And Patricia Diefender, for the record, I think it's important to just say that any land use decision could be appealable. I don't think we want to imply that.
Right.
Yeah.
But I've heard a number of times that it's like I've heard this mentioned related to the EOA. Now,
I think the reason we specifically say this about the EOA, because past history, and Tom can talk a little bit about the EOA previous to the current adopted EOA, there's just a lot of sort of inherent policy decisions in the economic opportunities analysis, especially as Tom characterized, going forward, looking at the multiple different policy objectives and trying to reconcile all the different policy objectives that converge in some of our industrial areas. And so all we're saying is that there's a lot of complexity to that conversation, and so there's the potential, But any land use decision, obviously, we just always have to caveat and say that any land use decision is potentially subject to appeal. And this is in the context of making this decision now versus, waiting for some future time. And we just want to make sure that it's clear that the EOA process is a process that doesn't have a lot of clear, the timeline is less clear right now because we're still pretty early in the process. And so there's still somewhat of a long road ahead for the economic opportunities analysis.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, I have heard a few times, because this has been brought up as a reason to not wait for the EOA to do this. My follow-up question then is, if in a hypothetical, any part of this plan went to LUBA, would that hold up the EOA? I'm hearing LUBA mentioned multiple times related to timing, and so I'm curious how, if it's not alone in what I mean.
I think it's safe to say that if this particular plan were to be appealed, it would not cause any kind of delay or issue with respect to the economic opportunities analysis. But the reverse could potentially be true because the economic opportunities analysis is looking more broadly at the whole picture, right? And so I'm just going to maybe ask Tom to just describe a little bit about what one of the previous EOA planning processes.
Well, I think, if this plan was appealed and that appeal was still pending and these 34 acres were essentially in limbo, right, and we were proceeding with the EOA, I think one of the points I was trying to make is that the 34 acres is a relatively small part in the grander scheme of things. And so we would probably show how, whether that 34 acres was industrial or mixed use, how we still meet a 20-year land need with or without it under different scenarios. And so, we would try and incorporate that flexibility or be able to, much like in the 2016 EOA, we had a surplus capacity. So it fits within that surplus. We would try and strive that depending on which way the plan appeal fell, we would still have surplus capacity to accommodate that.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That is helpful. I appreciate that. One last question, if I may, because you brought up the 34 acres. A previous slide had said the available acreage is 111. Is that?
Yeah, it's a little bit less than that. It's whatever that math is.
Okay.
Like
and that's
84 acres,
34.
right?
Okay.
So, it would take, from the 2016 capacity numbers, it would take a big chunk out of that surplus capacity, but it would still meet the intent of Goal 9 of having enough adequate capacity to meet that forecast.
Sure. But it also leaves less wiggle room elsewhere.
Yes.
Would you say? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Routh, I just want to clarify, though, that was kind of the discussion in that last slide was this notion that we're going to look to replace elsewhere. I just want to be really clear that is not, what we're saying, because for a couple of different reasons, but in particular, I think it's worth noting that in this Montgomery Park area plan, these are still going to be employment lands. They're going to be both housing and employment, and we're still going to be able to count we're using the value capture strategy and the public benefit agreement to mitigate the loss of the industrial land. We're still going to have jobs and middle wage jobs in the area. So we are offsetting some of that impact through the provisions of the combination of the public benefit agreement and the zoning. I think it remains to be seen. So we're not saying that those are totally lost acres, if you will, and that we have to make them up somewhere else. And also, as Tom mentioned, the fact that we recognize that this next EOA, we're going to be considering a lot of different policy objectives. And it's not necessarily that we're just going to be looking for one replacements. We may have to take different approaches.
I hear that. I guess we're not saying that. I hear you. Also, we're not saying that. This is all, what I'm hearing is that this is still an open question.
Well, it is an open question, yes, but the land supply, the industrial land supply is tight sort of regardless, and that's still an issue that we're going to have to deal with regardless.
Okay, additional questions on the EOA portion? Go
I
ahead.
don't really have a question. I have a little bit more of a maybe a statement or recognition. I know that a lot of creative spirit in Portland comes from, the creatives who need like industrial spaces in order to, do what needs to be done, to make Portland unique and in its own right. And noticing that this is yes, office jobs are great, but there's something to say too about having incubator spaces for businesses to be able to grow and expand. So I just would like that to be in the conversation, or I have an office at an eco-industrial site, and we get people coming in every day, all the time, looking for spaces to be creative, in an industrial area. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, and I think that's where the sort of the second half is not just about the jobs, but it's also creating that space, right? Because that space will be there. I think we'll probably start to see that soon in the downtown area, as with all this vacant space. Somebody's going to find a deal to lease it up and get started, kind of thing. So I think it's not only about counting the jobs, but even just having that space that may be different over time, but you still have created that space, that opportunity.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. Are we moving on to the transportation section? Perfect.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Sean Canny, a transportation planner at PBOT. Also present this evening are Mauricio Leclerc, supervising planner of the area and project planning team at PBOT, and joining us remotely is Dan Bauer, the executive director of Portland Streetcar. For the sake of discussion, I'll quickly overview key elements of the proposed streetcar extension. It is proposed to be an extension of the existing north-south or NS line via Northwest 23rd Avenue and a parallel one-way couplet on Northwest Roosevelt and Northwest Wilson Streets. The project includes a complete rehabilitation of Northwest 23rd Avenue from Northwest Lovejoy to Northwest Vaughan, including upgrades to utilities, stormwater, and accessibility upgrades as well. These much-needed improvements to the failing asset of Northwest 23rd Avenue are estimated to cost at least $20 million, regardless of the streetcar project itself. The project also includes those multimodal extensions of Northwest Roosevelt and Northwest Wilson Streets, as well as Northwest 25th Avenue through the former ESCO site. These connections will support internal multimodal circulation in the Montgomery Park area, in addition to streetcar operations. The streetcar extension is expected to serve 3,000 new average daily weekday riders when the area is developed. For comparison, average weekday ridership is currently around 7,000 on the existing NS line. A full half of these new riders are expected to be transit dependent. This ridership is expected to reduce automobile trip demand significantly in the area as it grows. As such, this extension is a critical mitigation tool for the expected development resulting from these proposed land use changes. The investment is necessary to support transportation system operations for all modes, as well as our carbon emission reduction goals. Given concerns expressed by community members, I'll also say a bit more about the plan for the extension to be off-wire. It is proposed to run on battery technology for a number of reasons, including an upfront savings of around $18 million in construction costs, ongoing maintenance costs savings that would otherwise be required for an extended catenary system, and significantly reduced impacts to the right-of-way and utilities in the project area. Off-wire technology has also been proven to work and be cost-effective. Off-wire streetcars are in use in many other cities in the United States, including Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Charlotte, North Carolina, Dallas, Texas, Detroit, Michigan, and Oklahoma City. Additionally, Portland's streetcars fleet is reaching its end of useful life and needs to be replaced outside of this extension. The purchase of up to 15 hybrid vehicles with off-wire capability, meaning that they are streetcars that can run both on the existing system and future extensions that are off-wire, was already planned. Dan Bauer, as I said, who is here remotely this evening, will speak more to the streetcar replacement piece in a few minutes. Next slide. The current planning level cost estimate for the streetcar extension and related improvements is around $120 million, again inclusive of those new street extensions and the rehabilitation of Northwest 23rd Avenue. The left hand of this slide shows a rough breakdown of potential funding sources and roughly expected shares. The federal Small Starts grant would fund at least 50% of total project costs. Right-of-way dedication for those new streets, as well as additional private contributions from the property owners, separate from their local improvement district contributions and toward those street improvements that they would otherwise be required to provide as a condition of development in the area, would cover around 25% of the project costs. The proposed local improvement district, which I will talk about in a few more minutes, would fund no more than 15% of total project costs, leaving 10% for localized funding sources. For localized funding sources, we are also seeking to avoid discretionary sources that could be spent elsewhere in the city as much as possible. I'll also note that, unlike previous streetcar projects in Portland, this project does not currently have access to tax increment financing or urban renewal funds, regional flexible funds for transportation, or any earmarks. And with that, I'm going to pass really quick to Dan Bauer to describe the streetcar fleet replacement piece.
Thanks, Sean. I apologize for not being there today. I learned a couple hours ago that I was around a very, unknowingly around a large group of people who had COVID. So I'm here to save you. But happy to take the time here. Just so you guys know, my name's Dan. I'm the director of Portland Streetcar Inc. here in Portland, Oregon. And in that role, I work with TriMet and the city and Metro and ODOT on the entire streetcar program, planning for, budgeting for, communications, customer service, asset management, any aspect of the streetcar program. Portland Streetcar Inc. is part of that equation. And your commissioner, Wade Lang, who's not here tonight, is on my board of directors. He has identified this conflict already. For the sake of this project, though, I've been working pretty closely with TriMet and Metro, but also the private sector and the public at large to position this project for success. And that means identifying funding and identifying the appropriate time to apply for funding. And so some of the things I want to talk about tonight are just kind of the process and the signals about how we go about securing what Sean identified there to be at least 50% of participation from the federal government. I want to just flag for everybody, because this is the biggest source of confusion, is the city of Portland that owns the streetcar system. This is the city's asset. The city is responsible for all capital replacement planning projects. This is a city asset. Okay. So with that background, I want to spend just a minute talking about streetcars themselves and how we're going to use them in the system and how we could potentially tie in the procurement of more streetcars or additional streetcars into this project here in a very, very cost-effective manner. So the first thing I want to note is actually to correct myself. We don't need additional streetcars for this project. We have 20 streetcars today. In the future, we'll also need 20. But what I do need is 20 cars that work. And right now, we have 12 of our 20 cars that are either reaching the end of their life or for one reason or another, we're unable to use. And so the city has already initiated a process to replace 12 of those modern streetcars. Those need to be in service by 2028. It takes us, from what we've known from recent procurements, at least 4 years to procure and bring a streetcar through safety certification and into revenue service. So if you do the math on that, we need to begin that process right now. And we already have. We have the RFP written. We're just kind of in a holding pattern waiting to see where this project's going to land. So that we expect that effort to cost about $80 million. It's about $6.5 million per streetcar. So we need to replace 12. We're very, very grateful that the Portland Clean Energy Fund saw the value in streetcar and contributed $30 million to that effort. But you can appreciate that doesn't quite close the gap. We still have a $50 million gap there. And like Eli, I like to find other people to pay for that. We have two options there. We can have the city of Portland pay for it and the taxpayers, or we can engage the federal government on how to pay for that. So the interesting thing about the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, is they don't really have an asset management program for rail cars. The only way to really engage in asset management or fleet replacement with the FTA is to go through what's called a capital investment grant program, which is what we're trying to do for this project. And specifically, they have a rule. It's called the special rule for rolling stock. I wish I made that up. That's the best name for a rule I've ever heard. It's very, very specific to this issue, which is you have a small extension or you have a project funded by the FTA and you need vehicles, but you don't need additional vehicles. And what it allows you to do is use the local money as match for the larger project. So that $30 million of PSEF money, we could use as $30 million a match for the FTA project. And all of a sudden that turns into 60 million and our problem became a lot smaller. The key to that is timing, right? We have to be able to order these cars end of the year. And that seems very, very doable on our end. But at the end of the day, if the project's going to be significantly delayed or canceled, the city of Portland is still going to have to find money to replace these streetcars one way or another. The most likely way that that would occur would be bonding, excuse me, some form of debt financing or bonding over the next 20 years, inherited by PBOT or the city. So I just don't want to bring this up as as a must-do thing, but there's a real opportunity on the horizon here to bring the vehicle replacement program into the FTA program and to really, really save the city probably $30 or $40 million on a project that needs to happen anyway, but that needs to be happening in a coordinated and timely manner. So I want to stop on the vehicles thing before I go any further and just see if there's any questions. I realize this is slightly outside of your guys' day-to-day scope, but I'm happy to kind of answer any curiosities on that front because it does impact timing, I think. And Sean, if you want to go to the next slide too.
Sorry, I do have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, to the last slide, could you?
Go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. This is so helpful. The Small Starts Capital Improvement Grant, I'm just curious in terms of timing, because for me, honestly, like as I'm hearing this, like so much comes down to a timing issue. Is the Small Starts, what is the time, like, is that a cyclical? I understand that it's a
Steph, you're
cyclical
asking the question I'm about to answer.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry.
So, no, that's fine. Did you have another vehicle specific one? Nope, totally good. Right. So the second issue I want to just flag on, and this has to do, again, Sean, if you want to go, or Barry, to the next slide, has more to do with timing and sequencing of all this stuff and what delay functionally means in this space. Again, as you're aware, I've been working closely with TriMet and Metro and ODOT and the FTA, just all trying to figure out how to best position this project. And I think the key point I want to make here, there's two. One is the FTA Small Starts program is not going away. The federal government hopefully is not going away. And the FTA is going to continue to fund good transit projects across the region or across the country. Really what we should be asking ourselves is how do we position this project to be successful? And the FTA's role in that is very clear. They don't deal with regional politics. When you have your act together as a region and everybody's on the same page and you've established a partnership that has led to so much success in Portland, that's when you engage the FTA at a real level. And so functionally what that means is the sequencing of transit projects in the region. And so we're looking at 3 major investments over the next few years: the Montgomery Park streetcar extension, 82nd Avenue BRT project, and the Interstate Bridge replacement, the transit component of the Interstate Bridge replacement. Functionally, again, what this means is the city of Portland is not actually the applicant for the funding. TriMet is the applicant, and the city of Portland would be a subrecipient to that funding. And what TriMet needs to demonstrate to the FTA is they have the financial capacity to carry all these projects across time. And so knowing that IBR is out here It's going to be a very, very expensive project. You have a window right now for 82nd Avenue and Montgomery Park to move in and demonstrate that the region and functionally TriMet have the actual financial capacity to carry these projects through where they are today, all the way through operations. And so that's just part of the timing of the whole program. We've been, Mauricio and his team and I have been working with Metro and TriMet to try and line these things up. And we've been meeting with the FTA to try and get the cadence right. But I just wanted you to understand that there's, I guess, some partnership at play here that I want you to be aware of when you're deliberating about what the impact of a delay here might look like. That's the end of mine, Sean, if you want to take off.
Thank you, Dan. Also, in addition to what Dan was saying, due to the scale of a capital project of this size, impacts of inflation to delays in construction would cost roughly $10 million a year. Again, the streetcar investment itself is also critical to support the proposed land use changes and development potential in the Montgomery Park area, including that housing, affordable housing and economic development. This also includes consideration of the opportunity cost of that benefit agreement with those large share property owners, as well as their significant contributions to these public improvements that we're talking about. And finally, without leveraging federal transit funding towards the rehabilitation of Northwest 23rd Avenue, we currently do not have any known or available funding sources to address those deficiencies on this street, and further delays to improvements will only increase the complexity and cost of reconstruction when and if funding can be found and secured. Next slide, please. We've received a lot of comments about the proposed local improvement district, or LID, to help fund the project. LIDs have been utilized as part of funding for every previous streetcar project in Portland, as well as many other public improvements in many areas of the city. This approach allows for the effective capturing of measurable benefits of infrastructure improvements and can also be used as local match toward federal grant funding. The formation of an LID requires its own formal public process, including engagement with potentially impacted property owners and a city council hearing and decision. During this process, the structure of an LID itself, including which properties are included and the amounts assessed, are developed. The city works with property owners to develop a unique assessment methodology for each LID formed in Portland. An LID must also receive support representing more than 50% of the LID value based upon its proposed assessment methodology, and the city council hearing presents another opportunity for additional public input. Amounts paid into an LID, as Patricia mentioned, correlate to an included property's size or frontage length, as well as proximity to those project improvements. Because of this, amounts paid vary, and the formal process required helps validate an appropriate structure for an LID. Financial responsibility for an LID is typically spread as widely as possible geographically whenever possible, while adhering, of course, to state and local law, in order to make costs as affordable as possible for everyone included. To get to the question that we had about single-dwelling homeowners or owner-occupied units, preliminary estimates indicate, for example, that if they were included, which is a topic of discussion itself, owner-occupied single-dwelling homes might contribute $500 to $2,000 total over the course of 20 years to the project, resulting in payments ranging from $7 to $20 per month. However, again, the structure of the proposed LID has not been developed and will not be done so without the engagement of property owners in the area. LIDs have also been very successful in Portland, and they typically result in payment schedules with better rates and payment timelines. And finally, the LID formation process for this project is planned to occur during the project development stage, which comes after the potential adoption of these deliberated land use changes. We are currently planning to formally request entry into project development phase after City Council deliberation on the Montgomery Park area plan itself, scheduled sometime in fall 2024. That stage is expected to last roughly 2 years, it depends, during which the LID process must be completed, as well as the identification and securing of all other local funding sources for the project. The LID assessment itself would not be applied until after project improvements are completed either, currently expected to be constructed and operational no earlier than late 2028. Of course.
Are those project improvements like building the houses or building the tracks?
Building the infrastructure. So the infrastructure has to be completed and operational prior to assessment.
Okay, so someone's bridging that cost. Who's bridging the cost?
the city bridges those costs through, the LIDs, from what I understand, are typically bonded, and then so the money is fronted by the city and then is
City's
paid
good
back.
faith and credit, whatever.
Correct.
And then it gets paid back through the LID. So the city's really effectively financially taking the risk that stuff actually gets developed there, because if it doesn't get developed there, the city won't get paid back through LIDs.
The LID would go through its formation process prior to construction. So the city council would vote on the formation of the LID, then construction would occur, and then the final assessment would be added to people's property taxes afterwards.
Okay, so the LID would be set up so that it could generate enough funds to pay back the city whether or not development happens, or is there sort of like a
It is,
where you
it's
really rely on
specific,
development to happen
specific to the,
to
it's
generate the increment?
specific to the transportation investment. Nothing to do with housing developer or anything else.
Just the public improvements of the streets themselves and streetcar investment.
But I think what you're asking, Commissioner Spivak, is if the development doesn't occur, will we still capture the LID payment that is anticipated? And the answer to that is yes. The site is responsible for the payment of the LID regardless of whether the development actually happens or not. I mean, the presumption is the development will happen, but either way, it doesn't matter. The payment to the LID will be a requirement.
It's sort of based on the land value, not the vertical.
Correct. And the city would go through a risk assessment prior to going through this process as well as we start to develop it.
Can you speak
If I can add, it actually adds a layer of incentive to develop, because once you've paid in the LID, you want to get your ROI back as fast as possible.
It's like a little
So
land
what-
value tax.
Can you speak briefly to the LID formation process? What bodies does that go through with the city? And then my second question, which we might not have a corollary with, but I'm assuming that as part of an LID, if there is a homeowner responsibility, they could go through a low-income exemption process. I don't know if we've set up, a comparison to that, but I'm just wondering, what is the process, and hoping that that kind of consideration could be incorporated within the formation process.
Yeah, absolutely. So the LID formation process includes, as I've mentioned, basically negotiation and conversations with impacted property owners and potentially impacted property owners themselves. And then in order for city council to consider the formation of an LID, the supporting petitions from property owners representing a majority of the proposed LID value itself, which is based upon proposed assessment methodology, must be received by the city before city council considers it. And then as far as, I'm not entirely sure whether there are low-income exemptions, but the city council has in the past, certainly, as an example, as I said previously, previous streetcar projects didn't include owner-occupied dwelling units in order to reduce burdens to specific groups. Again, that's something that we have not figured out. It's something that we would figure out with community members themselves, and would also be it would be a point of conversation with city council.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions or comments related to the LID? And Sean, you might have more slides.
I have one more.
Okay, go ahead and finish, and then we'll open it up.
We also wanted to respond to some feedback we received from the Planning Commission and from community members regarding the transportation project recommendations and policy recommendations in the Montgomery Park Area Plan. First, we heard feedback to plan for people over cars to promote non-driving trips and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The recommendations in the plan do prioritize vulnerable road users first in support of city policy, in particular transportation system plan policy 9.6, which is on this slide. It's called the Transportation Strategy for People Movement. Those prioritized users, of course, are pedestrians, people bicycling, and people accessing transit. Recommendations in the MPAP improve access, connectivity, safety, and comfort of non-driving modes into and from the Montgomery Park area, as well as the development of a complete neighborhood where people can meet their daily needs without an automobile. Second, the consideration of car-free streets and removing parking along the streetcar extension was also feedback we've received from some. Policy 9.6, again, while prioritizing people first and those vulnerable users, also requires that land use and transportation system planning support functionality and movement for all modes. In the Montgomery Park area, modeled trip demand resulting from the proposed land use changes requires automobile circulation within the area itself to help distribute those expected trips and not inundate the existing system. MPAP recommendations seek to balance access for all users, including automobiles to the existing neighborhood Main Street of Northwest 23rd Avenue and the proposed neighborhood Main Street on Northwest Wilson Street, while limiting loading and surface parking near the preferred streetcar alignment. Existing programs, of course, like PBOT's outdoor dining program, will be available to area businesses who would want to utilize on-street parking for other uses as well. Finally, we heard feedback that the streetcar extension should be both cost-effective and efficient. The preferred alignment is the most feasible, affordable, and direct route for the extension, developed through the consideration of various alternatives that I mentioned mentioned at the briefing last month. And again, I'll note that the efficient 0.65 one-way route mile extension itself is again expected to serve 3,000 new average daily riders once the area has developed. And with that, I'll pass it on to BPS to discuss some final items, unless anybody has any questions.
Is there a parking district already in the Montgomery Park area?
There is not, no.
Could there be some provision where it's an automatic yes vote to establish one?
There is an action item proposed in the plan itself to develop a parking strategy, which would likely develop its own parking district or an extension of a parking district to the area.
I've understood that sometimes they're hard, the way the voting works is hard to establish them sometimes. So perhaps what's the waiver of remonstrance, whatever the word is, like to say that you're automatically supportive of it might be a mechanical way of ensuring that it actually gets adopted.
Thank you.
So the last item here is we have wanted to mention some amendments that we expect to be bringing back to the commission to consider at the next meeting. So just a reminder, I believe Julie sent out this information the other day, that staff is requesting of the commission any amendment proposals from commissioners by June 28th, which is Friday. So if you have ideas, maybe we'll hear about them tonight, but otherwise we'd love to have all of that in by Friday, which will give us time to prepare them for consideration at the next meeting. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, staff has some proposed amendments for your consideration at the upcoming work session. And they come in kind of three flavors: some amendments to the proposed plan, some amendments to the zoning code, and then PBOT has several transportation amendments that they're proposing to the transportation plan that we want to make you aware of. So in terms of what's happening in the proposed plan, we have, this is the body of the policy plan, so to speak. We're adding, we hope to add acknowledgement of Ron Craig related to the renaming of Northwest York Street, as was brought up by the York Group testimony, and making sure that Mr. Craig's efforts are acknowledged in the plan and attributed. We also want to do further attribution and recognition of the York Street Work Group's efforts and their contribution to the plan. So we haven't developed those amendments yet, but that's on our list of to-dos between now and the next meeting. And then there's some technical and minor amendments. We're adding a map of the Northwest District plans, Northwest 23rd Avenue properties, where we're proposing some changes in zoning. That was just an omission from the original plan. It's in the volume 2, but it's not in the plan, so we want to make that connection and make that complete. There's some minor amendments to the urban design framework in the plan and historic site boundaries that we've learned have changed, and want to make those amendments. They're minor technical changes, as are the texts regarding the Northwest Town Center boundary. And then PBOT has an action item that they want to amend, which I think Sean just spoke to, which is develop a parking management strategy for the Vaughn Nicolai Plan District. So those are to the body of the plan, and of course we're welcoming the commission to weigh in on it if they have amendments they want to see as well. In volume 2, the zoning code, I've gone through a couple of these last time, but we'll be applying parking limitations and more guidance more broadly around the streetcar line near both Roosevelt and Wilson Streets. The way the plan was restructured, the code was restructured, that parking guidance and limitations did not apply around Roosevelt Street, and we want to make sure that they do, because both streets are important to deal with parking proximate to the streetcar. We also heard feedback from our partner bureaus regarding the service adequacy review, which is, as you may recall, there's a floor area bonus in Subdistrict B, which is the Montgomery Park site itself, where they have the ability, unlike the other subdistricts within the plan district, to go to a 7-to-1 FAR, either through transfers or by demonstrating that there's adequate services to support the additional development here. We heard feedback in conversations with our partner bureaus that, at least from water and BES's Bureau of Environmental Services perspective, that they did not need to have this additional review. But from a transportation standpoint and to comply with our findings, we want to make sure that the transportation still goes through, that the development would go through a transportation review to make sure that there's no adverse impacts to the transportation system here. So we'll be restructuring that to be focused on transportation. There's some technical clarifications about how the required non-residential use regulation would apply to development because of the way our zoning code defines new development. The way it's structured now, it would only apply to new buildings, new development where there is absolutely no development on a site. And many of the sites within this plan district are already developed and are large sites. So additions to that development wouldn't trigger this. We want to correct that so that those additions to large sites where there's existing development, those are captured in there and we get that non-residential floor area for jobs that we've been talking about. So we're going to restructure that. And we're also, we have a provision, if you recall, about affordable housing where a building that comes in that's 100% affordable to 60% median family income or less would be exempt from meeting the non-residential floor area requirement. It didn't, while it being exempt from the floor area requirement, it did not provide any offset to that non-residential floor area requirement. And we're proposing to give a limited offset in the case of those 100% affordable buildings to the non-residential, so that there's not a disincentive to providing that building, and that there's a bit of an offset as well. And we'll bring that back to you. We have a buffer area between the EX and the EG zones that exist within the plan district. It was recommended that we allow some of, it prohibits structures in that area, but fences are caught up in that definition of structures. We want to allow the opportunity to build a fence in that area if a property owner chooses to do so. So we're planning an amendment in that regard. And then we have minor technical amendments that address city bureau name changes and things of that nature, changing DSC, which is Development Services Center. That'll no longer exist, and it'll say the Center for Planning and Portland Planning and Development. Thank you very much, Shannon. And then again, we're going to correct the name of Bureau of Development Services to Portland Planning and Development. And then finally, we found a conflict in the Urban Green Features Standard, which is, as a reminder, the code provision that allows an option of either providing on-site landscaping or on-site landscaping with large trees or an eco roof, getting the percentages adjusted in the amount of pervious surface that can be built, like for walkways and pathways and play areas within those areas, consistent with how it's applied in other zones in our zoning code. We're reconciling it and make it consistent with the commercial mixed-use zones, after which it was modeled initially. And again, if the commissioners have recommendations or suggestions for amendments to the code, we'd like to get those as soon as possible before the 28th. And then finally, Volume 3, the Transportation Plan. There's a number of modest amendments that PBOT is proposing. Do you want to speak to those, Sean?
Thank you. Yeah, just a few small tweak amendments. The first two are just responsive to community engagement more than anything. The first being to add a recommendation to the plan to develop right-of-way standards similar to those that were developed for the Pearl District in order to support the preservation of the loading docks on Northwest York Street, while also guaranteeing accessibility requirements are met. So that would make it consistent with our urban design character statement that was co-created with community there from Volume 1. And then the second is editing the Northwest Vaughn Street crossing improvements, which we've heard many times from community members feel insufficient to address the barrier of Northwest Vaughn Street, to actually change that project a bit to recommend the short-term refinement, design, and implementation of the Northwest Motion recommendations, which are the recommendations, or this plan's recommendations come from that plan, that would actually also include multimodal corridor improvements and potentially greening opportunities, again, to help move forward that green curtain concept that was identified as part of the urban design vision. And then the others are just some technical edits to the TSB freight boundary and then some classifications. The first, the redrawing of freight district boundary, is just a small tweak west of US 30 and south of Vaughn. There's a tiny corner there that we would just remove from the freight district as part of this work to make it match comprehensive plan designations. And then a design classification change on Northwest Nikolai Street to help emphasize that that is intended to be the freight route through and in the area. And then the other is just some tweaks to emergency response route street classifications to be a little bit more in alignment with other modal priorities in the Montgomery Park area itself, while still supporting prompt emergency response access.
Thanks for everybody's patience. One last slide. So where are we at in the timeline and next steps before we open it up to your discussion and questions? So again, we're June 25th today at your work session. We are coming back to the Planning Commission on the 9th of July for a final work session, hopefully a final work session and your deliberations and recommendations. Again, we would like to get your amendments by the 28th. Sooner if possible, if you have them already. And then I just also want to acknowledge that the Design Commission met on June 20th. I think Julie recapped some of this in an email, but just to say that the Design Commission, Cassie Ballou, our urban design staff, did a great job in walking the Design Commission through a number of amendments. They are relatively pleased with the way that has shaped up with their amendments. I think they have voted to at least at this level, a tentative recommendation on adopting that, and I will be moving that forward. So their action is awaiting actions by the Planning Commission to kind of finalize things, and then they'll take a final vote after Planning Commission's next meeting. So that's where we're at now. So with that, thanks for your patience, and we want to open it up to your discussion and questions.
Barry, can I just clarify, if you could go back to the last slide just for a quick second? I think just to be clear about what the Design Commission recommendations would be, they have, do you want to summarize those?
Yeah.
I know that it's
Sure, and I might
recommending the
invite Cassie to-
de-overlay,
if
and then
they've-
some changes to the design the character.
Correct. Yeah, they voted to support the design overlay zone application in this area to the EX zones. That hasn't been quite formalized yet because they're awaiting any potential, change, any possible amendments that might happen out here, but they are very supportive of applying that. And the design character statement, a lot of the focus was on amending the character statement to really evoke ways to commemorate York along York Street. That was a focus of conversation of the Joint Commission meetings and both the Design Commission and Planning Commission at that point in time. And the Design Commission made some amendments to the character statement, and the character statement, as a reminder, is under their purview, and they make a recommendation directly to City Council regarding that. But they made some amendments to the character statement to evoke the character on York Street a stronger voice in that, and made some other minor amendments about how design could be better evoke some of the aspects of the character statement and the history and cultural significance of the Black and Chinese and Indigenous communities to this area. I might turn around to Cassie to see if there's anything else of note that I should mention.
Cassie, come to the mic if you're
Come on up.
gonna, yeah.
Have it.
Good evening, Commissioners. Barry, you're right. They focused a lot on making sure that there are not only revised guidance within the statement to clarify the cultural recognition of York, but also making sure that there was a tie to making sure that community and the city arts program was involved in some way. So we revised some of the background and policy statement to include that. There was also language changed to directly or more directly identify how the development could respond to the industrial and historical context, specifically Montgomery Park and the American Can Building. And there would also a lot of discussion about how to make Northwest Vaughan more successful, which Sean included some amendments from the transportation plan that we discussed. And I think those are the major pieces. Yeah.
Were there directions about, in the communication about commemoration of York Street or York on York Street? There was some direction about communication with community groups, I believe, in there as
Yes.
well. So I think that's important.
Yeah, we changed language within the background section to direct to, well, first we added the public benefits agreement to the additional resources section. So, developers and city staff who were using the statement were aware of that, but also alluded to the benefits within that statement, calling out the York commemoration piece and encouraged the inclusion of a city arts program and community organizations when doing commemoration and working on those pieces of the plan or projects.
Thanks, Cassie.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll turn it back over to the commission for any questions, discussion.
Thank you so much for that presentation. You all have done a really remarkable job of listening to our questions and concerns and bringing that forward with a lot of additional work. So I want to recognize you all for that. And let's open it up for commissioner comments, questions. I'm hearing particular interest on any amendments that might be proposed, given we are on a pretty short timeline to meet that June 28th request by staff. So open it up now and just encourage, if you do have amendments in the works, to speak to that. If not, you can send those in by the June 28th deadline.
Just a sort of a technical question. I haven't seen before, this is a creative solution, I think, that you have some amendments that get triggered at 200 units or 7 years, whatever comes later, I'm guessing. Does this actually go back to council or planning commission at 7 years, or is it's done now?
No,
Decisions made
the
now?
intention is that you would be essentially adopting both versions of the text, and then when the one gets triggered, it gets replaced.
I think we embedded in the, I don't know if it was in the code commentary or not, but the idea would be that in the ordinance that goes to council, there'll be a directive that basically says when that 200 unit count is met, the other code, the new code would supplant what's in the adopted code.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess after, to the transportation, I look back at T4, it says that the city would expand the parking district. Does the city can PBOT just do that unilaterally, or does it require a vote? of
That I'm
residents
actually
or
not
owners?
sure about specifically, because that's what we're recommending the changes is a parking management strategy that would allow us to decide whether to form a new parking district or to extend perhaps the downtown parking district, although the Northwest Parking District is mentioned in the plan currently. But I'm not actually positive as far as an extension goes whether a vote would be required.
Depending on the answer, I might have an amendment suggestion for that one.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Spivak. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, Vice Chair Thompson, go ahead.
Okay, I have a few comments and there will be some questions interspersed, and I'll try to keep it concise because I want to make sure that others have a chance to get to their questions and comments as well. But for me, the piece that I keep coming back to is the racial equity piece. And we did hear new information today about certain aspects of that. The displacement analysis in particular was really helpful, but the part that's still missing for me is any sort of accounting of how the value that we've been talking about that is possible with this development, how we ensure that a commensurate or balanced or reasonable amount of that accrues to BIPOC population specifically. And I have asked about the racial equity preliminary analysis that was done a number of years ago previously, and it outlined pretty high-level foundation and suggested several paths of inquiry and additional development. And it for pretty much all of the departments and bureaus that we've heard from, entities that we've heard from tonight, including the streetcar group. And I'm just, I didn't hear a great summary in all cases of how that work was incorporated into the spot that we're at now. Going back to the public benefits agreement, I think I have a general sense of some of the challenges that exist within that. And we've prefaced all of this by acknowledging that we're not in an economic cycle that will really support any of this right now. And that's completely valid. And we can't overburden things to the extent that none of this work can ever happen, because it just tips the balance sheet, you know, in the wrong direction. And I think that when we previously talked about community benefits and public benefits agreements, I had the sense that maybe there was a perception that some of what the community groups, the York group in particular, were asking for may tip that balance point to not be feasible for any of this development to happen. And I'm curious to explore that further if that's really the case, because some of the asks that they've come forth with seem like they could be cost neutral, and it's more about engagement and collaboration. And so, you know, there's a question there. The other thing that I was really curious about in the public benefits agreement was the procurement and subcontracting. I can't call it a requirement because it was down at the very end and it almost felt like an afterthought, but it basically said that the property owners would be encouraged whenever possible to subcontract with BIPOC owned or affiliated trades and partners. And I just didn't understand why that wasn't stronger or more explicit as a requirement, because there's a huge amount of value that will go into making this development possible. And I think that it's a real missed opportunity if some of that work and that value isn't allocated specifically to those groups. So I think that I'll just leave that part there for now. I'm a little curious about some of the climate stuff that came up. I mean, I understand that this is dense transit connected development, but climate friendly and other terms appeared. And I just wasn't sure if there was more to the climate friendly development aspect of this other than the fact that it is dense and transit connected, because I think that's worth exploring. And I know eco roofs came up a little bit and it wasn't totally clear to me. I don't think this is in the central city, so I don't think they would be required to do that. So I guess that's the main question that I have there. So thank you.
I think eco roofs are required, if I read that correctly.
Yeah.
Barry Manning for the record. The way the code is structured, development would have an option. So they could either do on-site landscaping of a certain percentage, so that provides some climate related benefit, or a lower amount of landscaping with large trees, which also have some benefit. And if they choose to or can't do either of those options, then Eco Roof would be the third option to meet that set of standards. So they're not required outright, but they're one of three options of a requirement. If that makes sense, hopefully.
I could also add really quickly that the street improvements would of course trigger both street tree requirements and on-site stormwater remediation requirements as well.
A follow-up on the procurement. I understand that under the public benefits agreement, these are not city contracts necessarily, so that's, I think, why that can't be a hard and fast requirement. I am assuming, though, with the streetcar line, which is getting outside of the public benefits agreement, that would be subject to public procurement requirements, which has the higher level of MWSB.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
And is that the
Like to-
clarification, just to
Yes,
address Vice Chair Thompson's
Yes, I did
question on that?
I wanted to leave space for others to talk, but if we're going to talk about that, absolutely, that's exactly right, Chair O'Meara. You have it exactly right. So those requirements the public infrastructure improvements would be subject to those requirements. The private development is not subject to those requirements, and so the sort of terms that were agreed to in the public benefit agreement is that they would try to adhere to those, but it wouldn't be mandatory because sometimes it's actually difficult. And maybe you have some experience with this that you can share, but sometimes it's actually difficult to meet those requirements in sort of vertical private development. And so they wanted to have the ability to exercise some discretion there, but generally they were open to trying to do that as much as they were able to do.
Yeah, I can't speak to the market rate development, but I will say that for the affordable, if it utilizes state affordable housing finance, it will be subject to the state Oregon Housing Community Services procurement, which does have an MWSB. So at least for that affordable component, again, assuming they'd be seeking state financing, there would be a state level MWSB requirement that would be triggered.
And just to confirm, that is absolutely true on the streetcar side. The federal government has their own requirements, and the city often adds a layer on top of that.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Thompson, for those questions and comments. Do we have any additional questions, comments, hints at amendments from commissioners?
I usually am looking at the community benefit side of this. I'm usually saying make them do more stuff. And in this case, I worry a little bit this may be more stuff because when it actually comes time when the economy starts coming back, there's other parts of the city where you have regular old IH requirements, not boosted up like this part of the city does. There are other parts of the city that don't have this design overlay, that don't have a requirement for non-residential space integrated into the project. If you're looking at like development capital, where's it going to go when the economy comes back? These are all good reasons not to go to this area. I mean, one motivation is the LID, which will motivate property owners to try and get their site developed to help pay it back. But in some ways, I'm torn here because it's like we're creating friction to do development exactly this place the city wants to have development to happen. So I just want to share that perspective. We're not here to recommend on the value capture part of this project, but I think we should be aware that we're capturing value in this area by changing the zoning to allow more to be done there. But we haven't done it anywhere else in town. So if there's other places where development might be likely to happen, it might be those places rather than here.
To speak to that really quickly, I think that's appreciate your comments on that. I think it's just really important to remind the commission that the public benefit agreement will be before the city council, that this commission doesn't have a role specifically in the public benefit agreement. But I think some of the comments that I've heard, particularly I wanted to just kind of go back to something that Vice Chair Thompson said about the York group. And I wanted to definitely assure the commission that some of their asks around greater engagement and collaboration and participation in process is something that we are committed to continuing to have conversations with them about. And as I said at the last meeting, we've already reached out. In fact, I have an outstanding email to the York Work Group to set up a meeting to talk about some of the ways in which they could be better incorporated in that aspect of the public benefits agreement. And I think that PBOT could also speak to the fact that they are having a meeting with the York Group as well to just talk through and understand better and potentially, see if there are any opportunities to respond to some of their requests related to the grant opportunities related to the streetcar project, and obviously the capital improvement grants there's not an opportunity for funding any aspect of community benefits through that funding, but exploring just what other things do they have in mind, and are there ways that we could partner or support. So I think this is just a way of explaining that we really are trying to continue in the process through the public benefit agreement and between now and council to do some of that greater engagement and collaboration or coordination with them.
Commissioner, if I may add just to that on the capital stack of how this development's all going to work, it does cut both ways in some regards. In so much as that if these developers, and specifically the owners of the ESCO site, engage with the city, they can get half of the cost, at least half of the cost of the roads on their property paid for by the federal government. So there's not a city subsidy there, but the cost of those roads where the streetcars are running, we can federalize that portion of the project, and that's worth quite a bit of money for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That all of the benefits, I don't know if it's become sort of evident through all the discussion, but it's really about, what contributions to the private developers, private property owners, what can they make, but also how can we just kind of leverage, the opportunities with the federal funding and other opportunities that don't, take large investments on the part of the city, but that the city, just by virtue of partnering, can bring more to the table, can help to bring more to the table to make the opportunities attractive in this area.
Partnership.
Patricia, thanks for the follow-up on that, and I'm glad to hear that the York Group specifically is being engaged, because obviously that we heard in testimony about them specifically, and so I think that's really front of mind. But not to belabor the point, but to zoom out, and again with the racial equity work that was done early on, I want to feel like we're accountable to that upfront work that happens, and that it's not just about like checking a box or doing something and establishing recommendations that we then like close the cover on and put on a shelf and don't think about for 5 more years. And that is a little bit, to just be quite blunt, how I felt about when I read this. I was like, this doesn't seem to really align to any of the other documents I'm looking at that much. And I feel like I'm beginning to understand some of the ways that that lens has been brought through the work, but it also just feels like there was a little bit of a box checking thing. And the actual racial equity toolkit, I don't know what the status of that was, if that's something that was applied here, but it's alluded to in that document. And then I don't know if we did it, and if we did, where is that? So again, it's just wanting to actually do this and be accountable to what we say we're going to do when we start to incorporate tools like that.
I think this is Barry Manning for the record. I think we could come back with a little bit more clarity on how we've addressed some of the issues that are raised in the preliminary racial equity report through the planning effort, and provide that for the commission before the next meeting.
Okay, and I would offer too, if this is just, I'm happy to have a conversation with you too, Barry, if that's easier and more efficient. I'm really reluctant to just like put more work on your plate in terms of like creating presentation or doing something like that. But I am genuinely very curious and understanding where things sit. So I'll leave it open to other commissioners of what people feel is appropriate, but I would be happy to take it that direction if that makes sense.
And that would be fine as well. A conversation would be a fine outcome, depending on what the commission would prefer, so.
Yeah, I'm supportive of whatever works for schedule and workload. I do want to encourage Vice Chair Thompson, if any of your reflections could be presented in the form of an amendment or specific changes to the plan that, take advantage of the next few days to present that. Also understand that some of these are clarifying questions for you, right? And so I think I do want to just understand that from your perspective, Vice Chair Thompson. Do you feel like having these questions answered would lead to amendments? And if so, any concern about the June 28th deadline?
I will pause. I just want to make sure that other commissioners have a chance to share their thoughts and questions, but we can follow up on that as well.
Okay. I haven't seen indication from anyone here in the room of comments, but looks like Commissioner Routh.
I'll just say
jump
that
in.
I
Go
have
ahead.
similar comments on par with yours, Erica. So
Guess I have this commission, Vice Chair Pouncil here. Just a clarifying question on transportation. You said on I think it was policy 9.6 on the all modal transportation. I was just wondering, how old is that? Do you know how old that is, or and if it's a legislative, is that a legislative policy with the state or?
The policy 9.6 is in the transportation system plan, so it's a component of the comprehensive plan. So it went through its local legislative process. That was adopted in 2018.
Thanks. I was curious because I just keep thinking about density and just people being injured. I've recently have relocated to this area, and it's very dense. And there have been a couple times where I've had, I have to watch myself near new seasons. And I just am just, kind of thinking about like understanding that all modes of transportation have to be considered, but I just would think that there has to be some type of capacity, and we're going to be adding more people. There's tons of people there already. We're going to be adding more people, and just like, where does that, where do we draw the line, to a certain degree? Right.
Definitely, I can speak to that briefly. One of them being the kind of the spirit of policy 9.6 is actually how we efficiently move people with limited amount of road space. So that's why, it is a safety issue, of course, as well. But that's why pedestrians are at the top of that list, because they require the least amount of space to get to where they need to go. So that's why we have that kind of upside down triangle with cars at the very bottom. And we do make it clear that while they're considered from a system perspective, that we're not inundating or overloading the system for cars, that we're certainly not trying to prioritize automobiles specifically. And I had one other point, and I've lost it. It was in regard to the moving of people. In the implementation of policy 9.6, we're also required to implement what are called complete streets policies. So they're multimodal designs that actually consider the interactions and potential conflicts between modes. So between people bicycling, people who are walking or rolling, and then, cars themselves or people trying to access transit. So yes, in the consideration of all modes for a broader network, broader network perspective has to happen. We design those streets and intentionally are directed to do so by policy, considering all users specifically and with focus on those vulnerable users.
Commissioner Rath, go ahead.
I just want to pause and appreciate everyone who has been part of this project for over the course of years, because it feels like it's a relatively, when you think of like something like design overlay zone amendments or, some of the larger projects that we've had a lot of deliberations on this project. That's a relatively small area. I mean, it's a lot of acreage, but it's not. There's just so much complexity. It feels like there's a lot of pieces, a lot of parts, and I think to Dan's earlier comment around timing and just trying to get all of the pieces to match. I just appreciate. I know that I have a lot of questions. I know that also I hear the timing issue, and I also we've also heard from other shareholders, community members, York Street, and other interests in the area, like some questions around pausing. So I feel myself phasing in and out a little bit of, what level of conversation to have and which part to focus on. And I just really appreciate staff and all shareholders who have come together to try to negotiate what is a lot of wheels moving in a pretty small spot. So just thank you. I know I've had a lot of questions like, what about this? What about that? But at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure out how this can fit into the fabric of a shared future.
Thank you, Commissioner Routh. Okay, unless there are any final comments or questions. Looking around, checking my virtual colleagues. Just a reminder, again, that we have a request to send any last comments or suggested amendments to staff by June 28th. My note says that staff will send a memo to commission by July 5th. Is that still correct? Okay, fingers crossed. Barry's fingers are crossed. There is a holiday in that time period. And then this item, the impact project, will continue to the July 9th Planning Commission meeting with the hope that there will be some final deliberation and recommendation from commission, the vote. Okay, all right, thank you all. We will adjourn. Okay.